I was holding a glass of champagne when I realized my marriage was already over. Not because he said anything, not because he confessed, but because of 3 words beneath an Instagram post. Half is mine. The photo was taken from our balcony, the marble one overlooking the city skyline, the one I had custom installed after closing our first international vendor contract. My company had gone public that morning. At exactly 9:30 a.m., the stock launched. By 9:42, it had already exceeded every internal projection. By noon, reporters were calling me the silent architect of logistics technology. And by afternoon, Forbes ran a feature with my face on it, an evaluation so large it felt unreal. $2.4 billion. I built it from a storage unit, no investors, no press, no shortcuts. 22 years of grinding, sleeping beside server racks, packing orders in freezing concrete rooms with no heating, eating canned food because rent had to come first. And there he was, Daniel, my husband, standing on my balcony, holding my expensive champagne in his freshly manicured hand, smiling like someone who believed he had crossed the finish line without ever running the race. The caption said he couldn't be prouder, as if he'd ever spent a single night debugging code at 3 a.m. while the system crashed. As if he'd ever slept with a chair wedged under the door because someone broke into the office the week before. That evening at dinner, he laughed too loudly with his new circle of friends, people with surgically perfected smiles and lawyers on speed dial. He joked about buying an island once the next round closed. He kept using this phrase, "I've earned it." Strange how he never said that when I was living out of a delivery truck because we couldn't afford a place to stay. He never posted selfies back then, never smiled about being partners when things were hard. But now I was a prize, a trophy, a headline. Then came the post that broke something fundamental inside me. Another photo. Same balcony, same skyline, same champagne. The caption read, "Built from scratch, half is mine, legally." I didn't comment. I didn't message him. I didn't confront him. I just stared at those words for a very long time. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with something colder, something precise, like watching someone step directly into a trap, one they never realized had been waiting for them for years. I'm 39 years old, and for most of my life, I was the kind of woman people forgot in a room, until the moment they needed something built, fixed, or saved. I wasn't loud. I wasn't charming in the way magazines like to describe. I didn't have that effortless social glow. What I had was endurance. I could sit with a problem for 12 hours and not move until it obeyed me. I could outlast panic, outlast pressure, outlast people who mistook my quiet for weakness. My company, Davidson Enterprise Group, didn't start as a dream. It started as a necessity. Back then, logistics was a mess of broken promises, delayed freight, wasted fuel, warehouses full of inventory that couldn't move because nobody could predict demand or route efficiently. Everyone complained about it, but nobody built anything that truly changed the architecture. So I did. I built my first routing model in a storage unit the size of a small bedroom, with a folding table, a secondhand laptop, and a space heater that only worked if you kicked it twice. At night, the air turned sharp, and my hands would cramp from typing. I remember wrapping my fingers around a mug of instant coffee just to feel warmth. Those years were lonely, but they were clean, honest. I only had myself to answer to. Then I met Daniel. It was at a tech conference, one of those crowded hotel ballrooms with cheap carpeting, fluorescent lights, and men in blazers trying to sound like prophets. I wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't have a booth. I didn't have a brand. I was attending as a nobody with a handwritten badge. He found me in the hallway outside the main panel room, standing alone with a notebook, scribbling ideas while everyone else pretended they already knew everything. "You're not networking," he said, like he was amused. "I'm working," I answered without looking up. That made him laugh, warm, easy, like he wasn't threatened by a woman who didn't perform for approval. He was handsome in a polished way, Not model perfect, but the kind of man who knew how to present himself. He made eye contact. He listened. He asked questions that sounded genuine. He told me he worked in brand strategy, marketing. I help people tell their story, he said. And at the time, I thought that was harmless. We started talking after that. Calls that lasted too long, texts at midnight, coffee that turned into dinners. He made my life feel less severe, like there was space for softness. When he asked me to be exclusive, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like relief. He met me when my life was still small, when I still had to do everything myself. He saw me carrying boxes, saw me juggling vendor calls while soldering together an overheating server rack. He told me he admired me. He told me he'd never met anyone like me, and I believed him. We dated for 3 years before we married. By then, the company had started to grow, not in a glamorous way, in a messy, stressful way. I hired my first 2 engineers. We lived off tiny contracts, regional vendors who took a chance on my algorithm because it saved them a few percentage points of fuel costs. There were nights I didn't come home. There were weeks when I slept on a couch in the office. Daniel would bring takeout sometimes and sit beside me, rubbing my shoulders, telling me I was going to change the world. He learned the language of sacrifice without ever truly living inside it. His parents loved the story of us, but not always the reality. His mother, Linda, was the kind of woman who believed love should look effortless. She hated how often Daniel ate dinner alone. She hated that I missed family gatherings because my servers were crashing or a vendor deal was on the line. She never said, "Your work is too important," the way people pretend to be supportive. She said things like, "Daniel deserves a wife who prioritizes him." His father, Robert, didn't say much. He just watched, calculating, like he was measuring what I was worth and how much of that could eventually become Daniel's. At first, I tried. I really did. I went to their dinners. I brought wine. I smiled through jokes that had a sharp edge to them. I listened to Linda talk about traditional marriage like it was a religion. And Daniel? Daniel always played the middle. He'd hold my hand under the table, squeeze once like a private apology, then let his mother finish her sermon without interrupting. But I didn't see it as betrayal then. I saw it as normal marriage friction. Different backgrounds, different expectations. I kept telling myself, he loves me, he's proud of me. And for a while, that was true. Until the company started winning, until the press came, until the lifestyle changed from we're building to we're displaying. Until Daniel discovered that being married to the founder of a rising tech empire gave him a new identity, one he could wear like a suit. And he wore it beautifully. That's the part that still makes my stomach turn, because when the world finally started calling me powerful, Daniel didn't celebrate my strength. He started treating it like shared property. Success doesn't announce itself with explosions. It seeps in quietly, changing the air in the room before you realize you're breathing something different. The first signs weren't dramatic. They were subtle, small enough to excuse, easy enough to ignore if you wanted peace more than clarity. Daniel started speaking for me in rooms where he used to sit back. At dinners with investors, he'd lean forward before I could answer, explaining my strategy with confident half-truths. Not wrong, just simplified, polished for effect. He'd say we decided, we believed, we built, as if the sleepless nights and the technical decisions had been a group effort. I corrected him once. Just once. We were driving home, the city lights blurring past the windshield, and I said quietly, "I'd rather speak for myself." He laughed like I was teasing. "I'm just helping," he said. "People connect better when they see us as a team." A team. That word became his favorite. Then came the wardrobe. Not mine, his. Designer jackets appeared in the closet. Watches that cost more than my first 3 laptops combined. He started spending more time at the gym, more time in front of mirrors, rehearsing stories about our journey with practiced pauses, like he was waiting for applause. When I asked about the expenses, he waved it off. "It's image," he said. "Perception matters at this level." At this level, I told myself it was temporary, that visibility required adjustment, that maybe I was being too rigid, too used to scarcity, to recognize evolution when it arrived. But then the questions started. Not technical ones, not curious ones, ownership questions. What happens if we sell? Have you thought about what's mine legally? Do you have everything structured for us? He never asked how the system worked, never wanted to understand the architecture or the patents or the licensing flows. He just wanted reassurance, verbal, emotional, symbolic. His mother started calling more often, always during busy hours, always with concern wrapped in sweetness. "Daniel says you're under a lot of stress," she'd say. "He worries you don't slow down enough." Sometimes she'd drop phrases like, "Marriage is about sharing," or, "When a woman builds something, it should benefit her family." I heard the subtext clearly. His friends changed too. Suddenly our dinners included people I'd never met, men who introduced themselves as wealth managers, women who spoke exclusively in future tense. They asked me invasive questions with smiles that never reached their eyes. "How involved is Daniel in the company now? Does he sit in on board decisions? You must love having a partner who understands business." I corrected them less and less. Not because I agreed, but because correcting people over and over becomes exhausting. And I was already tired. The worst part was how Daniel reacted when I pulled back. He'd sigh, accuse me of being distant, say things like, "You've changed," or "I miss the woman who trusted me." Trust. That word stung more than it should have, because I had trusted him. I trusted him when I left documents on the kitchen counter, trusted him when I talked openly about contracts and disputes, trusted him not to see my life's work as something to claim, and still I ignored the signs. The way he started introducing himself as the founder's husband instead of my husband, the way he'd casually say, "We're in talks," when the talks were mine, the way he stopped asking how I felt and started asking how much things were worth. The shift was gradual, but undeniable. Our home felt different, less like shelter, more like a stage. He hosted gatherings without asking, invited people into rooms I'd built for silence and focus. He'd laugh louder when I spoke less. He'd beam when someone mistook him for the mind behind the machine. And every time something in me tightened, every time my instincts whispered, "This is off," I silenced them. Because marriage is supposed to be safe. Because love is supposed to mean loyalty. Because I didn't want to believe that the man who once brought me takeout at midnight was slowly counting what he thought he deserved. But the truth was already forming. I just didn't know how sharp it would be when it finally cut. The moment everything cracked wasn't loud. There was no screaming, no slammed doors, no dramatic confession delivered with trembling hands. It happened quietly, on a screen, in perfect lighting, with a caption polished enough to look harmless to anyone who didn't understand what it really meant. I saw the post late in the afternoon, after the IPO reception ended and the house finally went quiet. The champagne flutes were still scattered across the marble island, fingerprints drying into faint rings. The skyline outside the balcony windows glowed gold, then slowly blue, like the city was exhaling. Daniel was on the balcony when he posted it. I could tell by the angle. The photo framed the skyline just right, catching the reflection of the city lights in the glass railing I'd personally approved after weeks of back and forth with the contractor. He was holding a flute of champagne, wrist tilted so his watch was visible. The one I hadn't commented on when it appeared in our closet. 3 words sat beneath the image. "Half is mine." No context, no explanation, just ownership. My chest didn't tighten the way people describe heartbreak. Instead, everything inside me went strangely still, like my body had switched into observation mode. I scrolled. Comments poured in. "Power couple. You two built an empire. So happy for you both." Daniel replied with laughing emojis, heart reactions, a casual confidence that suggested he believed the statement wasn't just emotional, it was factual. I locked my phone and stared at the reflection of my own face in the dark glass of the window. Not angry, not sad. Assessing. Dinner that night felt surreal. Daniel laughed louder than usual, surrounded by his new circle. People who spoke about acquisitions and exits like gossip. His hand rested possessively on the back of my chair, a public gesture meant to signal unity, partnership, claim. Once the next phase closes, he said, swirling his wine, we might just buy an island. Everyone laughed. I watched him as if he were a stranger. The way he leaned back, comfortable. The way he spoke with certainty about money he'd never earned, infrastructure he'd never understood. The way he used we as if it were a legal term, not a pronoun. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and smiled, a different smile, the one he reserved for attention. I should post another, he said lightly, already standing. The lighting's perfect right now. He walked back out to the balcony. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. A few minutes later, the notification appeared. Another photo. This one wider, more deliberate. His body angled toward the sunset, expression calm, assured, like someone who believed the outcome was already decided. The caption made my fingers go cold. Built from scratch. Half is mine, legally. Legally. That word didn't feel emotional. It felt procedural. I sat very still at the dining table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint clink of glass as someone shifted in their chair. No one noticed my silence. They were too busy congratulating Daniel. I didn't say a word. I didn't confront him, didn't ask what he meant, didn't warn him, because in that moment, something inside me finally aligned. Daniel didn't misunderstand our marriage. He misunderstood me. He assumed I'd married him as a woman who built a company. He had no idea I'd built a structure. After dinner, I walked past the bedroom without slowing. Daniel was on a video call, showing off the pool to someone who kept calling him babe and laughing too loudly at nothing. He didn't notice me take the scotch bottle from the sideboard, didn't notice me disappear down the hallway. My private office was the one room in the house he never entered. He called it boring, too serious, too quiet. The shelves were lined with old binders, legal texts, and notebooks filled with handwriting only I could decipher. An old metal filing cabinet sat against the wall, scratched, unremarkable. I turned on the desk lamp. The light pooled over the surface like a spotlight. I opened the cabinet, bypassed the top drawer, then the second, and pulled out the false panel I'd installed 2 years earlier, back when the company was still 3 engineers and a server rack held together with duct tape and desperation. Inside was a plain, leather-bound binder. No logo, no label, just documentation. I didn't open it right away. I ran my fingers over the cover instead, grounding myself in the familiarity of something I had built alone. Daniel thought he was claiming half of a visible company. He didn't know the real company had never lived where he was looking. And with that single caption, half is mine legally, he had done something irreversible. He hadn't challenged me emotionally. He'd triggered a system. One designed long before he ever thought of turning my life into a social media headline. Shock doesn't always look like chaos. For me, it felt like precision. I didn't cry that night. I didn't rage or spiral or pace the floor replaying old arguments. Instead, I sat in my office with the binder open on my desk, the desk lamp casting a narrow cone of light over documents I hadn't physically touched in years, but knew by heart. Page after page, diagrams, flowcharts, dates that mattered. My breathing slowed as I read, not because I needed the information, but because reading grounded me in reality. This was the world I trusted. Not words spoken over wine, not captions typed for applause. Paper, structure, consequence. I listened to Daniel's laughter drift down the hallway, heard him end his call, heard his footsteps as he moved through the house like a man who believed he owned the ground beneath him. I closed the binder and slid it back into the hidden compartment. Not yet. That night, we slept in the same bed. He reached for me out of habit, his arm heavy across my waist. I stared at the ceiling, counting my breaths, noticing how his touch felt different now. Not intimate, not comforting, possessive. In the dark, he murmured, "Big day. You should be proud of us." I didn't respond. Morning came with brutal normalcy. Sunlight poured into the kitchen. Coffee brewed, Daniel scrolled through his phone, grinning at notifications. "People are loving the posts," he said casually. "It's good optics." I poured my coffee slowly, deliberately. "Daniel," I said, my voice even, "what did you mean by 'half is mine legally'?" He didn't look up right away. "It's just a figure of speech," he said. "People know we're married." I turned to face him. "I didn't ask about people. I asked about you." That made him pause. He finally looked at me, eyes narrowing just slightly, the way they did when something didn't go according to script. "We're partners," he said. "Everything that happened during the marriage is shared." There it was. Not insecurity, not misunderstanding. Entitlement. "You didn't build the company," I said quietly. He scoffed. "I supported you." "You benefited from the outcome," I corrected. "That's not the same thing." His jaw tightened. "So now you're rewriting history?" he asked. "After everything I sacrificed?" I studied him in that moment, the way his posture shifted, the way his voice sharpened. He wasn't asking for reassurance. He was asserting a claim. "What exactly did you sacrifice?" I asked. Silence. Then, irritation. "I stood by you," he said. "I put my life on hold. I represented us." Represented, like a brand. I nodded slowly, letting his words settle into place. "I need you to take the post down," I said. He laughed, short and dismissive. "You're overreacting." "I'm not negotiating," I replied. "You made a legal claim in public about something you don't own." His expression hardened. "You don't get to control the narrative anymore," he said. "This affects me too." That was the moment I understood there would be no private resolution, no quiet conversation, no mutual understanding. This wasn't about marriage. It was about leverage. He stood, pushing his chair back. "My lawyer agrees," he added casually, like he was mentioning a dinner reservation. "It's all marital property." My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. "Which lawyer?" I asked. He smiled. The smile people wear when they believe they've already won. "I've been preparing," he said, "just in case." Just in case. I nodded once. "Take the post down," I repeated. He shook his head. "No." That was it. Not the breaking point, but the confirmation. I didn't argue further, didn't threaten, didn't explain. I picked up my coffee and walked past him, feeling something settle deep in my chest. Not anger, not grief, clarity. By the afternoon, I received the notification. Not a message, not a call. A process server. I watched from the upstairs hallway as Maria, our estate manager, answered the gate intercom. I heard her voice echo softly through the house. "Ms. Davidson, there's someone here with documents requiring your signature." I walked down the hall slowly, opened the door myself. The young man standing outside looked pleased with himself. Overdressed, smug, holding the envelope like it was a trophy. "You've been served," he said. I took the papers from his hand, nodded once, closed the door. And as I stood there in the quiet foyer, documents warm in my hands, one thought rose above everything else. Daniel believed this was the beginning of a fight. He had no idea he'd just activated something that had been waiting, silently, patiently, for exactly this moment. The escalation didn't arrive with shouting or slammed doors. It arrived with systems. I scanned the packet Daniel's lawyer had sent. Every page clean, formal, confident. The language assumed ownership, partnership, entitlement. It treated my life's work like furniture acquired during a marriage. Divisible, negotiable. I saved the file without edits. Clause _17B_activated.pdf. The folder name hadn't changed in years. I didn't call Daniel, didn't call my attorney. There was no need. By the time the sun set, the architecture had already begun adjusting, quietly, automatically, exactly as designed. Daniel noticed the first crack 2 days later. He drove to the office in the white luxury SUV he insisted on ordering, fully loaded. Appropriate for leadership events, he'd said. He parked in the reserved founder spot, walked past security like he belonged there, and swiped his badge at the glass entrance. Red light. Soft beep. He tried again. Nothing. The receptionist, a new hire, barely out of college, looked up politely. "I'm sorry, sir, you're not in the system." Daniel smiled, confident. That's impossible. I'm Mrs. Davidson's husband. She checked again. You're not listed as a visitor either. Would you like me to call someone? His voice sharpened. I don't need an escort. I helped build this place. She didn't argue. She just picked up the phone. Facilities declined to intervene. That was the first moment doubt flickered across his face. He called Daniel. No answer. He called his lawyer instead. This is intimidation, the lawyer said smugly. Classic pressure tactics. We'll file an emergency motion. Emergency. Daniel liked that word. It made him feel important. By noon, the second crack appeared. His laptop. The internal dashboard refused to load. Error code. Account disabled. Slack? Gone. Cloud storage? Empty folders. The presentation he'd been preparing for a founders, spouses, and leadership partners panel, replaced by a system message. Access denied. User not recognized. He called IT. I'm Daniel Davidson. I'm sorry, sir. We can't verify your credentials without a valid badge ID. I don't need... You'll have to speak with HR. HR already had instructions. Not emotional ones. Procedural ones. The moment Clause 17B was triggered, internal compliance protocols activated, permissions revoked, audit trails locked, access marked terminated with prejudice, a designation reserved for hostile actors or breach parties. Daniel wasn't a spouse anymore. He was a security risk. I watched it all unfold from a distance, not with satisfaction, with inevitability. By evening, his phone started lighting up, calls he couldn't answer, messages he didn't understand. His assistant, gone. His company email, purged. His directory profile replaced with a blank placeholder. He came home, furious. What did you do? He demanded, pacing the living room. I looked up from my laptop. I didn't do anything, I said truthfully. You filed. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. He accused me of manipulation, abuse of power, threatened press, threatened court. I listened. Then his mother called. Linda didn't bother with pleasantries. How could you humiliate my son like this? She demanded. After everything he's done for you? I let her finish. Daniel filed an adversarial claim while using licensed assets, I said calmly. The system responded. What system? She snapped. The one you never asked about. She hung up on me. Friends started choosing sides, quietly at first. Invitations stopped. Group chats went silent. The people who once toasted Daniel's proximity to power suddenly remembered urgent conflicts. And then came the building. 3 weeks after the filing, Daniel walked into the courthouse like it was a product launch. Tailored suit, confident stride, legal team flanking him like security detail. His lead attorney laughed when he saw the docket. This will be finished in an hour, he whispered, loud enough for others to hear. Daniel believed him. He scanned the courtroom, expecting me to arrive flustered, defensive. I was already seated. Same gray suit I'd worn to the IPO reception. Same watch. Same stillness. My attorney, Catherine Miller, didn't smile, didn't shake hands. She carried a single sealed envelope, navy blue, unmarked except for a date printed in silver ink. The judge called the case. Daniel's attorney stood. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of equitable distribution. Which entity? Catherine asked quietly. The attorney blinked. The publicly traded logistics firm. Catherine stood and handed the envelope to the bench. No speech, no theatrics, just documentation. Trust ownership certificates dated years before the IPO. Licensing agreements. Independent valuation audits. Clause 17B, highlighted. Then the USB drive. The judge inserted it, clicked once. The screen filled with screenshots. Every Instagram post, every caption claiming ownership, every public admission. Daniel shifted in his seat. His attorney interrupted. We dispute the enforceability of that clause. Which clause? The judge asked without looking up. Clause 17B. The one upheld twice in federal court? The judge replied calmly. Silence fell heavy. Daniel's confidence didn't shatter all at once. It fractured. Small. Precise. Like glass under pressure. And for the first time, he realized this wasn't a negotiation. This was a system executing exactly as designed. Victory doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it feels like standing alone in a room that has finally gone quiet. Too quiet. After a storm you didn't ask for but knew was coming. The night after the first hearing, I didn't go home. I checked into a small hotel across town under a name that wasn't mine, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the city lights bleeding through the curtains. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from advisors, short confirmations from legal counsel, a few carefully worded notes from people who wanted to be seen on the right side of history. I didn't answer any of them. I wasn't grieving Daniel. I was grieving the version of myself who once believed love meant shared intent. That version had trusted tone over structure, affection over architecture. She had believed proximity equaled contribution. She had ignored the way Daniel's questions shifted from, "How are you holding up?" to, "What happens if—" I lay back and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every memory replayed with surgical clarity. The first time he spoke for me in public. The first time he used "our" to describe something I built alone. The first time his mother looked at me like I was a resource instead of a person. I had seen it all. I just hadn't wanted to name it. By morning, the fallout had begun to spread in ways I hadn't anticipated. Not louder, not messier, but colder. Daniel's lawyer withdrew. Irreconcilable conflict, the filing said. Professional language for this is indefensible. Daniel tried to reach me. Texts first, then calls. "You planned this," one message read. "You humiliated me," another. "We could have handled this privately." Privately. As if he hadn't made a public claim, as if he hadn't sent a process server to my front gate with paparazzi already waiting. I blocked the number. Not out of cruelty, out of necessity. That afternoon, I drove past the vineyard we used to escape to on weekends, the one Daniel liked to call our future. The gates were closed, new signage posted, a private leasing notice with a logo he'd never seen. He had signed it away years ago in exchange for early access to what he called a legacy asset. Temporary access. Permanent loss. By evening, I received confirmation that the house would be reclaimed at quarter's end. Lease termination. New tenant scheduled. Standard procedure. Daniel didn't know yet. And when he found out, it would break something in him that no courtroom ever could. That night, alone again, I finally felt it. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Exhaustion. I sat on the floor of the hotel room, back against the bed, arms wrapped around myself, not in despair, but in recognition of how heavy it is to survive something you loved turning against you. I wasn't the villain in this story, but I wasn't untouched either. The dark moment wasn't about losing him. It was about accepting that the life I thought I was protecting, a marriage, a partnership, had been an illusion I outgrew before I was ready to let it go. And in that darkness, a quieter truth surfaced. I had built everything to outlast betrayal, but I had never built anything to help me heal from it. I cried then, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to release the pressure. And when the tears stopped, something else took their place. Resolve. Not the sharp kind, the steady kind. The kind that doesn't need to prove anything. By the time the sun rose, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the bottom. And bottoms, real ones, aren't where you die. They're where you decide how you stand back up. The turning point didn't arrive with applause or revelation. It arrived with silence. The kind of silence that settles after chaos has exhausted itself. After the noise of accusation, entitlement, and performance has burned through all its oxygen. 3 days after the hearing, Catherine called me. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "It's over," she said. "Not officially yet, but functionally. They have nothing left to argue." I leaned against the window of my hotel room, watching traffic inch along the street below. "What changed?" I asked. "A lot of things," she replied. But one mattered more than the rest. She sent me the document a few seconds later. An internal compliance memo. Dry, procedural, devastating. It confirmed what Daniel's legal team had finally understood too late. that every claim he made assumed I was an employee, a participant, a beneficiary of the public company. I was none of those things. I had never been on payroll, never drawn a salary, never appeared on any capitalization table. The entity he sued wasn't the source of my wealth. It was a storefront. The real ownership lived elsewhere, behind trusts, licensing vehicles, and structures that had been finalized before Daniel ever proposed. The memo ended with one sentence that stayed with me. The respondent's position is external to the disputing entity and therefore insulated from marital equity claims. External. I wasn't inside the thing he tried to take. I was the thing that allowed it to exist. Later, the original legal architect, the man I'd met years ago in a dim office with bad coffee and a blinking desk lamp, who'd warned me that betrayal rarely comes from competitors. He submitted a sworn statement. Not emotional, not personal, just facts. He confirmed the intent of Clause 17B, confirmed the premarital origin of the IP, confirmed that Daniel had never been included in any ownership discussion, formal or informal. And then he said something quietly brutal. Any assumption of shared ownership was self-generated. That was it. No more ambiguity. Daniel's narrative collapsed not because I fought harder, but because it was never real to begin with. That evening, I returned to the house for the last time. The movers were already there, not hostile, not rushed, just efficient. They wrapped furniture Daniel had picked, boxed decor he'd insisted on, left behind the things I'd never cared about. I walked through the rooms slowly. The kitchen where we'd argued, the living room where he'd hosted gatherings for people who mistook proximity for power, the balcony, the one from the photos. I stood there alone, the city stretching out in front of me, and realized something unexpected. I didn't feel lost. I felt separation. Like removing a weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. Daniel wasn't there. He didn't want to see this part. He wanted spectacle, closure on his terms, a final argument he could perform. He didn't get one. Instead, he received a notice. Lease terminated. Access revoked. No further claims recognized. I left my keys on the counter. Not as a gesture, as a fact. By the time I stepped outside, my phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel. Just one line. You think you've won. I didn't reply. Because winning was never the point. Understanding was. And I finally understood this. I had spent years designing systems to protect my work. But the real turning point wasn't legal. It was internal. I stopped seeing myself as someone who needed to defend her place. I saw myself as someone who had already outgrown the room. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves, quiet, cumulative, unavoidable. Daniel's lawyer filed the withdrawal 2 days after the compliance memo circulated. The language was polite, professional, merciless. Irreconcilable conflict. Translation, there was nothing left to argue, and no one willing to stand beside him while the ground kept dissolving. Investors stopped answering his calls. Not dramatically, not with rejection. They just didn't respond. People who once laughed at his jokes at dinners suddenly remembered meetings they couldn't miss. Messages went unread. Calendars stayed full. Just not with him in them. One founder sent me a single text. He's reaching out. Should we be concerned? I typed back, no, there's nothing to be concerned about. And that was the truth. Daniel's relevance had always been derivative. Without access, without proximity, without the reflected glow of the company, there was nothing solid beneath him to stand on. His social media tried to pivot. After 3 days of silence, his account reappeared. Not with champagne or skyline views, but with muted selfies and vague captions. Some journeys are misunderstood. Growth isn't always shared. Karma finds its own path. The comments weren't kind. Didn't you say half was yours? Why did your lawyer quit? Wasn't she the one who built everything? The likes were sparse, the engagement thin. Influence evaporates quickly when the source of it disappears. He hosted a private brunch the following weekend, trying to reset the narrative. Rented out a rooftop cafe, linen tablecloths, branded menus. 12 invitations went out. 3 people showed. 1 left after 10 minutes. The other 2 stayed long enough to post a single photo, tagged at a completely different location. Behind the scenes, consequences moved faster. An accountant flagged irregular transfers from shared accounts to Daniel's personal branding initiatives. Once the divorce filings went public, those transfers attracted attention. Audit letters followed. No charges, no accusations, just questions. Credit lines tightened. One was frozen pending review, another quietly expired without renewal. The vineyard, gone. The house, no longer his. The car, leased through an entity that no longer recognized him as an authorized driver. They simply stopped belonging to him. The most painful shift, though, came from his own family. Linda stopped calling, not out of principle, out of embarrassment. At a family gathering I wasn't invited to, someone asked what had happened. No one had a clean answer. The story was too complex, too quiet, too unflattering. It's easier to explain betrayal than it is entitlement. Daniel tried to fight back emotionally. He sent emails accusing me of cruelty, of coldness, of never loving him enough. He framed himself as a casualty of my ambition. I didn't respond, because every accusation he made was rooted in the same assumption, that my strength existed to serve him. The final hearing arrived without fanfare. No press, no crowd, no performance. Daniel looked smaller, not physically, but energetically. His hair unstyled, nails bitten, a gray cardigan instead of a suit. His new court-appointed lawyer was young, nervous, already aware that this wasn't a fight, just paperwork catching up with reality. The judge flipped through the documents Catherine submitted. Ownership breakdowns, trust structures, triggered clauses. At one point, he let out a soft, almost incredulous laugh. "Mr. Davidson," he said, looking at Daniel, "this record clearly indicates the respondent was never employed by the company you referenced." Daniel blinked. The judge continued. "She doesn't work for the company. She owns it, indirectly, through multiple irrevocable vehicles. The entity you sued isn't the source of her wealth. It's merely licensed." Licensed. Daniel's lawyer dropped his pen. No one picked it up. That was the end. No equity, no leverage, no settlement. Just a ruling that erased the story Daniel had been telling himself and everyone else for years. I stood when it was over, smoothed my sleeve, nodded once to Catherine. Daniel didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, frozen in the realization that the world he thought he'd mastered had never been his to claim. I walked out without turning back. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left behind me worth facing. I returned to the balcony one last time, not the one from the photos, not the marble stage Daniel loved, but a quieter one in a place that belonged only to me. The city looked different from here, less performative, more real. I held a glass of champagne cold against my palm and watched the skyline stretch outward, buildings lit from within, systems humming invisibly beneath glass and steel. Somewhere out there, my company's logo glowed on 3 towers, steady and unbothered. Most people still didn't know who truly owned them. I liked it that way. Daniel never understood what he married. He thought he married a founder, a CEO, a visible success story. He didn't understand that I'd stopped building things that could be taken a long time ago. After watching too many brilliant women lose their work to partners who claimed proximity as contribution, I learned a different language, one made of clauses, timing, and quiet exits. He thought love gave him rights. It doesn't. Love gives you access, and access is always conditional. When that access is abused, systems don't scream, they close. I didn't win because I was cruel. I didn't survive because I was heartless. I survived because I was prepared. Prepared for the possibility that someone who smiled beside me might someday stand across from me. Prepared for the reality that betrayal rarely looks like malice. It looks like entitlement wearing confidence. I don't regret loving him. I regret ignoring the moment love turned into leverage. What I learned is simple. and it's the lesson I wish someone had given me years ago. Build your life so that it doesn't collapse when someone leaves. Build your work so that it doesn't belong to anyone who didn't earn it. And never confuse silence with softness. Some people mistake calm women for compliant ones. They mistake privacy for weakness. They mistake trust for permission. They're wrong. By the time Daniel realized where the real ownership lived, every map he had was outdated. Every door he thought he could open had been locked years before, with intention, not bitterness. I set the empty glass down and breathed in the night air. The story didn't end with revenge. It ended with clarity. And that, I've learned, is far more permanent.